and get it out to folks. I think it'll be valuable for everybody to hear what Michael, Vivek, and Bob are doing. And I'll share a few things on the state of the startup capital markets if you're ready to go.
I am ready to go. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for being here. I think this is going to be a really informative discussion. David's going to spend about 15 minutes giving us a quick summary of state of startup capital. And then we'll have a good discussion with 3 BioAlabama companies that all represent really unique biotechnologies. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion. A little bit about David. He's developed a really deep expertise in technology, working as a tech executive and entrepreneur over the last 40 years. He's, sorry, I have to let people in. He served as CEO, COO, CIO, and CFO with 5 startups that he's launched. I think he would tell you that his biggest success was in 2006 when he sold his company to KPMG. He, I think, tried to retire briefly and then started a bank. Did that for a couple of years, tried to retire again, and then worked in digital health consultancy. So, you know, active minds, we have to be engaged and busy. So now he's helping healthcare clients fundraise. He serves as an angel investor and LP. So we're really excited to hear what David has to say today. I was trying to think about how we connected originally, and it was actually in a conversation right around the pandemic, when the pandemic started. And it was a conversation online where people were kind of trying to figure out how the pandemic was going to affect investment in startups. And a lot of the comments were really negative. And I remember David coming in and saying, hey, actually, this could end up being really good for startups, and there could be an opportunity for additional investment. And I think what we're seeing is that David was right. And so this is obviously something that he thinks about a lot, has a lot of experience to talk from. So with that, I will let David take it away. If you have any questions, if you will just send those in the chat, I will ask them when David is done.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Thanks to BioAlabama too for sponsoring this webinar. You know, when we talked about doing something like this, the question was what content would be of interest. And, you know, about 18 months ago, I started helping my clients raise capital, and that was 2 months before the pandemic kicked into high gear. And so I thought maybe a webinar on, you know, what's the impact on the private capital markets, specifically for startups as a result of COVID. So you're going to see a COVID kind of flavor to the content that I'm going to share with you. But again, as you mentioned, we have Michael Lynch, Vivek Lal, and Bob Schuffelbarger of 3 bioscience companies. And I'm really excited to facilitate a discussion with you guys. What I'd like to do first is this screen that you're seeing here shows the 4 stages of startup development. It's pretty standard, but you know, I'd like to remind people that the definitions of seed, Series A, Series B, and C aren't really so much about how much money you're raising. It's more about the business maturity you are as a company. So seed capital is you've got a product, but you're trying to figure out product market fit. Once you achieve product market fit, then you go raise growth capital. And this graphic here shows the label as optimization, but it's really about crossing the chasm, if you will, into market adoption. Series B is pouring you know, fuel on the fire, if you will, to scale the company. And Series C is scaling as well, just at another level. Many companies never need to do a B or a C, or certainly not a C. And then you see some companies doing D, E's, and F's. And when I see those coming out, I'm thinking these investors are flipping their investment and getting liquid and getting out of the previous investment. Not always the case, but sometimes the case. Oh, there we go. So what I'm going to do is spend a few minutes on the state of capital for startups. Then we'll introduce the panel. I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we'll have a discussion, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, general Q&A. I don't need to go over this slide because Rachel did such a great job of it, but as you can, it's kind of my, my bio, if you will. The thing that I'd like to bring out to you is the fourth bullet there, raising 250 million plus in private equity capital over the last 2 decades. 100 million of that was one investment. And when I say raise 250 million in capital for my companies, that means the companies that I built or the companies that I was an investor in and sat on the boards and helped them raise subsequent rounds, or companies that I'm advising, helping them raise venture capital as well. I've been an LP, a limited partner in several venture funds over the last almost 20 years. Continue to do that. Achieve pretty good returns. I'm very happy with the funds I'm involved with. I'm a former angel, and I say former because I wasn't very good at it, honestly. I mean, I invested in a number of companies and only had partial success. And so about 6-7 years ago, I just focused on funneling more capital into the venture funds that I was an LP in. So I'll go on from there. The last bullet just indicates or shares with you what you said, Rachel, is I'm an advisor to startups and early stage companies. I help them primarily raise seed and A round capital, so ranging from 500 to 5 million. I've got one right now that's much larger than that, but for the most part, I'm helping those companies because those are the most difficult to raise, and they can't afford an investment banker. So that's where I focus my efforts. So I'm going to talk about these 5 things: impact of COVID, deal structures and valuations, what I see as being hot and what's not hot right now, a few trending items, and then I want to speak a little bit about SaaS. Now, everybody knows what SaaS is, and there's derivatives of SaaS now, like desktop as a service, and I would just put an X there. There's a lot of different, basically what that's doing is they're using technology to enable services. So obviously what that does is allows you to get recurring revenue as a company selling your services via technology. Why is that important now? Well, it's kind of de facto accepted right now. And when you throw AI on top of it, then you've got a wildfire, and just a ton of venture capital goes to those kinds of solutions. So I see the impact of COVID as having kind of 2 impacts. One is temporary and the other one is more permanent. When I'm going to talk about deal flow in the next slide, but just in concept, March of 2020, the first week of March 2020, deal flow came to a sudden stop. Buyers or people that were looking for capital, they decided to sit on the sidelines, because, at least for a little while, because it was too uncertain as to who would be interested in funding them. The suppliers of capital, the investors, pretty much did the same thing. So for about 2 months, deal flow just came to a head. But as I said, I'm going to speak a little bit more about that on the next slide. Every company had to, when COVID hit, had to assess whether they had a headwind or tailwind related to COVID. So an example of a headwind is companies that were, for example, in the wedding planning services market really struggled because all weddings just came to a halt. So that even persists to today. It hasn't fully recovered. So that was a significant headwind. A tailwind, an example, is this company in Birmingham called Procter & Gamble. They actually had a jet stream behind them. They were doing really well before COVID, and then COVID kind of accelerated their value proposition because they were providing online virtual testing for both higher ed, but also for enterprise America. So they had all the infrastructure for that. So they were a beneficiary of COVID, but also a great leadership team. There are some permanent impacts of COVID, and I tell people, it's my opinion that COVID was a black swan event, meaning it was unexpected, although some people knew it could happen. And that the impacts of black swan events, there are some permanent changes that occur in culture and business and so forth. So one of them is some barriers were lowered, like virtual healthcare, so telehealth and remote patient monitoring. The reimbursement codes that were out there were, insurers and Medicare were really resistant to reimbursing, telehealth and RPM. Well, those really lowered significantly as a result of COVID, and those changes will remain going forward. Work from home is another example. I know you all have read or heard about, especially the West Coast companies that are saying we're not our tech companies, we're not sending everybody back to the office. We're gonna come up with some kind of a hybrid model. Supply chains, there's going to be permanent interruptions in supply chains. There are companies out there now that are being very successful selling safety protocol systems, technologies into enterprise America right now. And investors will think twice in their diligence about companies they're about to invest in regarding existential threats. I don't think that was on the due diligence checklist for most investors, but it will be now going forward. So deal flow, as I mentioned, the private capital markets froze up March to May of 2020, but then it started slowly returning to normal month over month throughout the remainder of 2021. This created pent-up demand, which led to record levels of deal flow in the fourth quarter of last year and the first half of this year. This is interesting. U.S. venture capital that was available for funding in 2020 was 5 times what it was in 2010. So in that 10-year span, it's gone from 32 billion to 166 billion. That's pretty significant. Digital health alone, which I'm very familiar with, deal funding in the first half of 2021 is greater than all of 2020, and it could end up being 3 times what 2020 is or was. Now, deal structures and valuations. So pre-COVID, deal structures and valuations favored entrepreneurs the previous 5 years. It was trending toward favoring the folks that were looking for capital. COVID flipped that in the second and third quarters, but there wasn't a lot of deal flow. As I mentioned, it was just coming back, and it returned back to favoring entrepreneurs in the fourth quarter of last year. Today, valuations are pretty frothy. One of the reasons is there's persistent low interest rates, bringing non-traditional investors on and offshore to the venture capital party. Now, some purists in the venture capital markets, they go, well, that's bad when you have non-traditional investors coming in. Sometimes they like to call them dumb money. They don't understand the nuances of venture capital investing. But the evidence is really the contrary. They have brought in some really smart people that have provided a lot of capital. But what's interesting is, it's created a disequilibrium in the private capital markets with regards to supply and demand. So there's just more supply than there are companies looking for deals. Now, if you're an entrepreneur looking for money, this probably frustrates you to see this comment. But the final bullet makes my point is investors aren't straying from their core investment theses, even though. So they're staying pretty disciplined, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Having said that, I wanted to bring up these 2 interesting companies here. One's called Transmit Securities, Israeli-based. They just raised $543 million Series A round on a $100 million revenue company valued at $2.3 billion, a pre-money value at 2.3, which is amazing. And it being defined as an A round means it's the first outside capital that it took. So what does it do? They're disintermediating the need for passwords. So there's a big market for that, and that's probably why they got that valuation and that much money. Pretty exciting. Another one is a real estate tech play, early revenue, raising 170 million A round on almost $1 billion pre-money. So there is incredible deals that are out there that are happening at these high valuations. Oops. So what's hot and what's not? So SaaS and more SaaS is hot. And I want to talk about that in a few more minutes. So hold that thought. AI, and more AI. You've all seen it, AI, machine learning. It seems like everything from golf clubs to, to hats now have an AI angle on it, which makes you a little suspicious. But the reality is AI actually is, and machine learning and derivatives are creating interesting value. And when you combine AI and SaaS, it's like crack cocaine to an investor, especially the VCs. Digitalization of anything, but in digital health, certainly, especially virtual care, which I talked about previously. Fintech is a darling. Cybersecurity is obviously very hot. Crypto is gaining steam. It kind of goes up and down based on what's going on with crypto. Last mile delivery. That's investors love that. That's food and other goods and services. And then I put convertible and safe notes as hot. Really not hot. There's just increased acceptance, and companies are raising larger amounts on convertible notes. And obviously, the value of convertible notes or safe notes is you delay the valuation discussion until you do your qualified financing, 18 months or 2 years later. But if you can do that, raising 5 million versus 2 million, that's a good thing. There's dilution associated with that, but it's probably less dilution than a priced round at that level. Okay, what's not hot? I would call them copycats, and I would ask you to look over to your right in the image right there. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people say, "This is the Uber of pick your segment, pick your space. We are like Uber for blank." And so, yeah, at a time that was kind of made a lot of sense, but it's investors aren't going to invest based on that characterization. Marketplaces, digital marketplaces were all the rage, 5 to 10 years ago. Again, Uber was one of those. Blockchain, believe it or not, in my research, I figured out that ice cream was on a downswing in terms of investors. And then complex business models. So, my advice to entrepreneurs raising money is don't tell too complicated of a story, because it takes too long. These investors are typically looking for a reason to say no so they can move on to the next deal and the next deal. So start out with a easy to understand business model. And then once you sell them on that, then you can explain the nuances of extensibility of additional revenue streams, which is always a good thing. So I know many of you are up to speed on equity crowdfunding. These are third-party platforms. There's pros and cons to them. The efficacy of them, I would argue, isn't all that great. And people don't understand when they go through the crowdfunding platforms, the platforms really only deliver about 50% of the money you're trying to raise. You have to go find the other 50% and channel them through the platform, which means you need to spend your marketing dollars to do that. So just buyer beware. Crypto is obviously trending. And then ESG investing, environmental social governance, that's gaining a lot of steam. It's been around for a number of years, but it didn't really start gaining steam until about the last 5 years or so. So there's investors out there that, especially a lot of family offices, that are totally focused on ESG investing, and they won't look at anything else otherwise. So SaaS, the world has changed a lot in the last 15 years. Companies, had a choice of whether they were going to build their own software or they were going to have build it internally, or they were going to have a third party help them build it, or they were going to buy something off the shelf. But something happened really about 10 years ago, and these SaaS solutions took off, and they were cloud-based systems that were funded by venture capital, which created kind of a cheap, lightweight solution for almost any business problem out there. Now, the reality is these SaaS solutions are what I would call primarily point solutions. They're not big, complex, multi-workflow solutions. They're getting better at it, but anyway, so the point is you've got, I don't know if you guys know who Mark Andreessen is, but he coined the term software is eating the world. Now you're seeing that SaaS is eating the world. I mean, look at these investors. And why is that? And it's really this region right here is over from June 2008 to December of last year. Look at the median multiples for SaaS company, publicly traded SaaS companies, going from really 2x all the way up to 16x. I mean, that's a phenomenal increase in multiples. And the private capital investors that are funding companies that then go public in the public markets achieve this kind of return. So that's why they're doing it. I wanted to share that with you. And then if you have any questions for me regarding these content that I just shared with you, please put them in the chat channel and I'll circle back. But now what I'd like to do, I'd like to introduce Michael, Bob, and Vivek in that order, and ask each of you guys to share your story and along the lines of these bullets here. I would appreciate that. And Bob, or excuse me, Mike, I'll turn it over to you. You're on mute, Mike.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so Chonex is a soil health company. We help farmers bring their soil back to life. The problem that we're solving is the way we've done agriculture for the last 50 years. We've used so many chemicals, the herbicides, the fungicides, the pesticides, and then all the synthetic fertilizers. It's basically sterilized the soil. And then the way we've been tilling up the land has also just destroyed the microbiome of the soil and caused incredible erosion. We've lost about a third of our topsoil over the last 50 years. So our solution is a microbial concentrate we make from upcycling poultry manure. We use an insect called the black soldier fly to eliminate all the bacteria that produce toxins like E. coli, salmonella, all the pathogens in manure. We've developed a way to dry it, make those microorganisms go dormant. And then we've developed a brewing process for the farmer where they can multiply those microbes trillions of times and then put it back into their soil using a big spray rig. And they can do it at the same time while they're planting their seeds, while they're putting up Roundup or putting out fertilizer. So it makes it really easy on the farmer. We're getting great results. We're doing field trials in 20 different states right now on 25 different farms. We're seeing that farmers can reduce their fertilizer inputs and chemical inputs by up to 50% by adding our product. We are a seed stage company. We raised almost 3 years ago, we raised $1.5 million and really pitched our pennies. We had incredible support from companies and leaders all over the state of Alabama to kind of get us this far. We are doing a seed round right now. We should close next week, just under $6 million. It's kind of a hybrid round where we have a little bit of equity and then the rest of it goes into a convertible note. We're just extremely fortunate. A family office Nathan works with that's on here is part of what we're doing. Our future plans are really to, we really want to go after some of that ESG money, some of the outside Alabama money. So far, all the money we've taken has been local money, and we're going to put ourselves in a position by building a prototype facility, getting in the position where we're, a cash flow positive, selling product is, kind of establish the market, and then go after a really big round. The biggest challenges that we have are, how do we get out of the transition from the Alabama market that's a little bit more conservative and go after some of the, the San Francisco money or the New York money, and really try and get a big valuation and do something really big, because there's incredible potential to scale what we're doing. COVID had a huge impact on us. We were very fortunate. When we took our pre-seed round, we took the first half of the money and stretched it out as far as we could, and then we took the second half of that money 1 month before COVID hit, and basically used that money to weather the storm. We were planning on starting construction, what we're about to do in the next few months, over a year ago, and so we had to weather that storm. But we're in a much stronger position now. Allowed us to build a really strong team, get our product out all over the country, get a lot of feedback, do a bunch of research, and all this is kind of being, we've kind of finished up our R&D phase and are in the commercialization phase right now. So we're really excited about that.
That's great, Michael. That was very informative. So I'll come back to you with some questions, sure. But let's go to Bob next. Hey, Bob. You're on mute, Bob.
Here we go.
There we go.
Thanks, David. Trialtis Bioscience is a life science tools company. We have products and services that are used in biotech, pharma, and academic research. The problem that we try to solve is that the vast majority of drug development involves protein research or uses proteins in some form or fashion, but they're difficult to isolate and purify. Trialtis has a novel chromatography technology for purification that works on proteins previously thought to be unusable or unpurifiable. And it also, compared to existing methods, it gives 10 to 100 times higher yield than other methods. Our business model is multifaceted. We sell reagents for purification based on our patented technology. We purify proteins ourselves using that technology and then sell those proteins as products. And then we do protein purification as a service on a custom basis for customers. Traction-wise, thus far we have more than 100 users in 15 countries, including 5 of the top 20 pharma companies. That sounds pretty impressive, but our revenue is still quite low. Company stage, I would say we're somewhere between seed and Series A. I think we've done a lot to demonstrate product market fit, but funding-wise, very similar to Michael's first round, we raised about a little over $1.5 million about 3 years ago, and we've been squeezing that, especially the second half of that. That sounds like a familiar story, Michael. Of how many of us had to hunker down and just do whatever we could to stay around through COVID. That raise was a combination of friends and family, a small amount of it, angels and family office, all from the Southeast and mostly from Birmingham. Future funding plans, we intend to raise a Seed Plus or Series A this year. Probably in the neighborhood of $3 million. The proceeds would be to add resources for product development, business development, and some capital equipment for scale up of production. So in talking about challenges for fundraising, I'm anticipating a little bit because we've not gone onto the road just yet, but that will be happening soon. But I think a challenge we've anticipated and tried to address ahead of time is that even though we've made significant progress, life science tool adoption often takes 3 to 5 years. It takes a while to get traction and to get widespread adoption there. And I think life science venture capital gets this, but general investors may be benchmarking on SaaS or other types of companies. Right. We all sort of get painted with the same brush sometimes, and that's, I think, not in favor of biotech or life science companies. So we've been intentional about emphasizing longer term growth and the value of patents and IP, which typically isn't there for other SaaS or other types of companies. And we've also delayed a little bit just to give us as much time as we can to demonstrate product market fit, and especially with these pharma and commercial clients, most of which we've gotten in the last 6 months. Regarding COVID impact, Our business stalled a bit overall because many of the labs we were calling on, especially academic labs, they were shut down if they were non-essential, or some commercial labs and academic labs, they shifted all of their research work to COVID-related things, and we just didn't have a play there. So on the other hand, we had some opportunities. Some of these labs asked us to do contract manufacturing while they were shut down, and that led to a business pivot, and that's now a significant source of revenue for us. Yeah, so I think in the short term, COVID was not good, but it certainly forced us to be lean and very, very thoughtful and deliberate and strategic about where we were spending our time and money.
Right, great. That was really good, Bob. Thank you. Yeah, one of the reasons that I spend a little bit more time on SaaS than anything else is it's the elephant in the room. As, you know, with my clients, if they're not a SaaS model, and we're talking to a SaaS investor, it's just so what I try to do is avoid that conversation in the first place. Make sure that investor understands alternative business models into a SaaS solution. If my client is not a SaaS solution, because they can't get it out of their head. I was kidding earlier about crack cocaine, and it is from an investment standpoint because it's a proven model. I mean, it works, So anyway, Vivek, great to see you again. Look forward to your comments.
Thank you, David. So at Resbiotic, we are making probiotics for lung health. We have two subsidiaries. One is the Resbiotic Nutrition part, and the other is Resbiotic Pharma. In Resbiotic Nutrition, we are first launching a probiotic wellness supplement for lung health. This is first-in-class microbiome-based probiotic for lung health. We are on track to launch it for pre-sales come October this year. The second product line or second vertical from Resbiotic Nutrition is medical food specific for specific lung diseases. The first medical food would be launched middle of next year. The clinical trials for which are starting now, and that'll be for COPD. We are also starting clinical trials for bronchiectasis and some pediatric lung diseases. From the Resbiotic Pharma vertical, we are trying to basically pioneer engineered live biotherapeutics and biotherapeutics extract for inhalational therapy for lung diseases. The two work-in-progress drug development candidates there are for end-stage COPD or severe COPD, stage 3 and 4, and for non-small cell lung cancer. So that's about what we do in the company. We are a seed stage company. We launched Resbiotic last year. So far, we have raised a seed round of $3 million from family offices who are friends and family. So I call it friends and family offices. And our future plans is we want to move quickly onto a pretty large Series A, because the drug development, as you all know, takes a lot of money, especially the clinical trials, and we're starting all those. But to support those, we would need at least a 25 to 30 million Series A round, which we're going after in the next 6 months. The biggest challenge would be to find that money in Alabama, right? So I think it is outside money which will have to be sought after. And as Michael alluded to, that is the biggest challenge for all of us here in Alabama. How do we get those warm intros to the real Silicon Valley VCs, etc. So I anticipate that being a challenge, but hopefully we'll overcome that. As far as the COVID impact on the business and fundraising, if anything, COVID actually pushed me to go ahead and start the company sooner than what I would have thought last year, because it personally for me gave me the time to actually spend some time on the company formation and the business aspect of this. We have been working on the scientific aspect of this company for the last 8 years. And it was timely because we are addressing the respiratory health component, which has become I think, it grew by 42%, the market in respiratory health in the last year itself. It was already a 93 billion market. and it's anticipated to be 117 billion market by 2026. So that pushed us to start the company early, and we are pushing all hands on deck towards our first launch end of this year.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. So I'm taking that because of the next rounds that each of you are going to raise being substantial, that you're probably going for institutional money and not individual angel group type money. Is that right?
Yes, at least for us, yeah.
I think I'd named the smallest amount of the three, and at 3 million, it could potentially happen. It's more likely to be possible locally. So,
right.
Yeah, there's certainly a trade-off. Well, it's just a different world with institutional money. Both the due diligence and the expectations ratchet up with that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is different.
That's right. And they do want to write larger checks. So,
right.
That's just their model. Well, so I have a question for all three of you. And we'll go in reverse order. Vivek, we'll go with you first, and Bob, and then Michael. What part of your story resonates the most with investors that you have talked to? Either they funded you, but let's say people that turned you down for whatever reasons. What did they like about your story, and what did they like least about your story?
I think any story in front of the investors have to make business sense first. I think the biggest factor here was I was able to bring on the table the business aspect of medicine, which, from the feedback I've received, is not very common in our physician scientist community. So money talks, and no idea works, howsoever good it is, if it doesn't make money, right? So the idea has to be monetizable. So that, I think, needs to be at the crux of your operations. Yes, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of things just for making a change, but the change would not happen unless it reaches the end user, and the end user will receive it only through commercialization. So the idea has to be monetizable, and then it has to be supplemented by the team, et cetera, and the expertise here. So I think that was the factor which did resonate with most of the people I went in front of.
Okay. Bob?
My emphasis has been on differentiating life science tools from biotech in general. And, in some ways that I think initially might have been perceived as a negative. I mean, like tools is not sexy, like someone that's making a new drug. On the other hand, we have what I think are many of the advantages of life sciences: protectable, defensible intellectual property and patents that can create a sustained competitive advantage, but a much shorter path to revenue, and not having a binary outcome with the FDA. And essentially we can operate independently of FDA approval by supplying companies instead of trying to create a new therapeutic product.
Gotcha. And Michael, how about you?
Yeah, I think the things the investors liked about what we were doing is, like Vivek said, that it's there's potential for a lot of profitability, but beyond that, it's really the kind of the mission of the company, that we've really developed a solution for one of the biggest problems in agriculture, that we can really help protect our souls, how we can reduce all the Roundup, all the liquid nitrogen, all the stuff that are causing a lot of environmental problems. People are really excited about that. We got a great team, some of the world leaders in terms of bioagriculture. We brought on a woman named Pam Marone. She just sold Marone Bio for $500 million. It was the second company at that kind of scale that she sold. She's on the board of trustees at Cornell. Just an incredible scientist. And then we brought on the guy that's working really closely with our Secretary of Agriculture to reshape all the farm bill to be based around soil health, how we do farm subsidies. And then he's working with the 15 largest food companies that are requiring all the farmers to shift how they do agriculture, from conventional agriculture to regenerative agriculture, which is all focused on soil health. And I think it was timing. We're at the right place at the right time. So people have been really, really helpful. And I think we just the whole story, the whole team, and what we were going to accomplish got folks excited. And we ended up getting 3 times as much money as we were asking for, which was maybe means I underpriced the round, but
Well, don't second guess yourself. You were successful. Well, I see we have a couple of questions. One is, how hot or not is biotech and relevant subsectors due to the COVID pandemic? Anybody want to take that one? How hot or not is biotech and relevant subsectors due to the, I guess what the question really is, were the headwinds or tailwinds related to biotech major in a significant way? I think each of you kind of addressed that in terms of your own perspective, but do you have a perspective on the broader biotech industry of the impact of COVID, headwind or tailwind?
I think, as you said, the market is frothy, and it is frothy in the biotech space also, I would say. And it comes down to the subsectors as to where it is concentrated. But in general, I think the biotech space, if at all there was a little dip, it has bounced back pretty well. That's my take on it based on what I've seen in the last 1 year.
I think for people outside the scientific community, it's underappreciated what a remarkable accomplishment it was to develop these vaccines so quickly. And I think even with in the general public, I think that created some increased appreciation for the power of science and the potential for some technologies that were sort of fringe before and now are much more mainstream. And that, I would think, gives rise to greater opportunities in biotech for investors.
Yeah, it's my understanding the framework for these vaccines was really kind of invented back in SARS-1, but they took it off the shelf and really perfected it, you know, after pouring a lot of money into it. It's interesting though that it's, you know, the speed with which they were developed also created some distrust, you know, in the public as well. And it's probably one of the inhibitors to get into, you know, full herd immunity, you know, anytime soon, but hopefully we will. Michael, did you have any comment to that question? No. So another question is, has COVID shifted VC thinking about company location, i.e., is it more palatable to receive investment and keep major operations in an area outside of traditional VC areas like Boston and California? I'll have an opinion on that. Those barriers, those requirements were coming down pre-COVID. We were seeing pre-COVID California investors coming into Atlanta, for example. And COVID obliterated that. That was one of the barriers that I was talking about earlier. That was an artificial barrier that investors put up because they wanted their portfolio to be near them. And now all they want is good deals. And, you know, there may be some, there are investors, institutional and otherwise, that their mandate is economic development for their community, whether it's state or local. So they do have to stay near, you know, to where they are. But in general, the answer is, I think that barrier has come way down, and it's less of an issue these days. Okay. I don't see any more questions. Rachel, you want to take us out?
Yeah, well, I actually did have a quick question for you, David, based on your summary slides. I thought that it was really interesting to see the VC capital availability, see that growth between, I think it was 2010 to 2020. And then you talked about some non-traditional investors. What was really driving the availability of that VC capital? And do you anticipate that it'll be sustained?
Good question. It depends on alternative investment opportunities for those non-traditional investors. One of the key drivers has been these persistent low interest rates, right? So they've just decided we need to put some money in venture capital, take a little bit more risk. So you've got these huge mutual funds, you've got offshore government entities that need to put capital to work. So they're creating investment pools, if you will, and they're flooding the U.S. with it, basically, because that's where the vast majority of innovation occurs. Israel is a really hot spot for innovation as well, especially on the tech side. So can it be sustained? Not indefinitely. I wouldn't think so. And just like with any disequilibrium in a market, it's not healthy for it to stay in disequilibrium indefinitely. So it'll swing back over time, but it's not going to happen overnight. We're years down the road before that happens. Good question, though.
Thanks. So I do know that some of our panelists need to leave in a couple of minutes. So I want to thank all of our panelists for serving today. Thank you, Michael, Bob, and Vivek. This has been really informative for me. I've enjoyed it. Thank you, David, for all of your preparation and for helping mediate this conversation and start us off with a really great summary. If in the future, if any of our listeners need to contact you, is there a best way for them to do that?
Yeah, email will be fine, david.karabinos55@gmail.com. I should have put that in the slides, and we can make these slides available to anybody that wants them as well.
Sounds good. I'll email it to all the registrants. Thank you again so much. I will go ahead and end the session. If there's any questions, feel free to email me, and I will forward them to the panelists or David, or email David directly. Thank you again to everyone who's been here today.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.
Thanks.